Thank you for joining us for our last presentation of the day, The Final Word. Please welcome to the stage Nolan Finley, editorial page editor, Detroit News.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the final word of the 2019 North American International Auto Show. On behalf of the Detroit News and our publisher, Jonathan Woolman, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. This year's auto show, the last of its era, generated a lot of news this week, with much of it coming from Ford Motor Company. From the introduction of a revamped Explorer to a red-hot Mustang 500 GT and an all-electric F-150, to the intriguing partnership formed with Volkswagen. So we're fortunate today to have as our guest for this final session of the old auto show era, Ford Motor Chairman Bill Ford. Bill has chaired Ford for 20 years, stewarding the automaker his great-great-grandfather founded in this city, a company that helped make Detroit the industrial powerhouse of the 20th century. Now it's Bill Ford's vision that his company and its hometown become the mobility powerhouses of the 21st century. Bill joined the family business nearly 4 decades ago, holding a variety of domestic and international positions in manufacturing, sales, marketing, product development, and finance before becoming the top dog. He helped steer Ford through the Great Recession without asking for a government bailout, while at the same time pushing the company to be a leader in technological innovation. A lifelong environmentalist, Bill, in 2000, led efforts to publish Ford's first sustainability report. That kicked off an ongoing effort that has resulted in reduced use of water and power and cut the amount of waste Ford sends to landfills each year. In 2009, Bill Ford helped found Fontanellis Partners, a Detroit-based investment firm that nurtures transportation infrastructure companies around the world. Last year, Bill completed a deal to return Ford Motor Company to its hometown in a big way with the purchase of the Michigan Central Depot in Corktown. He's a board member of the Henry Ford, chairman of the New Michigan Initiative of Business Leaders for Michigan, a past chair of the Detroit Economic Club, and a former director of eBay. Interviewing Bill Ford is Detroit News Associate Business Editor and columnist Daniel Howes, the nation's foremost automotive commentator. One of the smartest decisions I've made in my career is hiring Daniel in 1993. I offered to teach him everything I knew about the business, but for the good of our readers and the business, he resisted that suggestion. Daniel has reported for the news from nearly 25 countries and has won a boatload of writing and reporting awards. He holds a bachelor's degree in history from the College of Worcester in Ohio and a master's in international affairs from Columbia University. Bill, Daniel, you have the final word. Welcome. Just a bit of housekeeping before we start. You have note cards on your seats. If you have a question for Mr. Ford, we'll be taking some at the end. Please write down your question, pass it to the outer ends of your rows, and someone will be around to collect them.
Got the shot clock. We got the shot clock right here. So, Bill, let's start with the auto show itself. What's the one word you would use to describe this year's show?
Well, it's fun, and it's always fun. I mean, if you don't get excited at an auto show, you probably should go do something else. It's changing, obviously. Everybody's focusing on who's not here. But frankly, for those that are here, it's a blast.
You talk about transition. Detroit is not alone in a changing, dying, morphing auto show situation. We're moving to June in 2020. What's your sense? What's the sense at Ford and among the industry about that move, and how important is it, and how will it change this whole experience?
I think it's great. I've often felt that we should move to summer. Look, Detroit in January is not exactly a great draw, and we get people coming from all over the world, and our streets are empty. Now fast forward to June, and with the city so vibrant now, our streets will be alive. It'll allow the show, actually, and all the automakers to do things outdoors as well, which obviously we can't do now. So I think they can create a whole different experience and really reinvent the experience in a way that I think people are going to love.
As Nolan said, this is your 20th year as chairman. I think it's about the time that you and I met was when you took over the chairmanship, maybe a little bit before. 40 years as an employee. Where is Ford right now? How would you describe the position that it's in and what it's planning to do as it moves forward?
Well, we are, and I'm sure you're hearing this from everywhere, we're at an unprecedented time. And I suppose you could always say that if, at any point in the journey, but really everything's changing now. And so what we're trying to do, and I think all the automakers are trying to do, is we're trying to make the best cars and trucks for today, and then create a tomorrow which is largely unknown, but we know it's coming. And so it's a really tough management challenge. It's going to take a lot of talent. It's going to take a lot of capital. It's going to take different geographies all working together. I think it's really cool, though, because if you think, if our mission should be to improve people's lives around the world, and I would argue that that has been our history, we have a chance now to reinvent what that means for a very different future. I'm really excited by it. In some ways, I saw this coming. Nolan mentioned Fontanelles Partners, the venture capital firm that I founded in 2009. Part of the reason I did that is I saw this change coming, and I wanted to get familiar with it, get in early, and really, try a few theses out to see if it was really going to work. Now it's all here. It's at our doorstep, and I think it's really exciting. And I think for the first time, you're going to really see winners and losers in the auto industry in a way that we really haven't before. Before, it was always, did you gain a couple tenths of market share that year, or did somebody else?
How will we know who those winners and losers? How will we measure winners and losers?
I think it won't happen overnight. But ultimately, it'll be about who chose the right technological path, who chose the technology and could deliver it. This is really important to the customer in a way that makes their lives better, because it's so easy to get transfixed on the technology itself. All the articles you read are about all the tech, and of course it's all true and it's interesting. But you have to take a step back and say, is this actually improving people's lives? Is it making it more enjoyable, easier, and more fun? And if the answer is no, we probably shouldn't do it, or we should try and repackage it in a different form. I mean, you and I have been around this industry long enough where we can remember when automakers, including Ford at times, would introduce technology and the customer said, I hate it. What is this? Why are you doing this?
That was your early sync, I think some people.
Well, that was, it wasn't a rousing success when it first launched. There were other cars where I can remember from our competitors where the driver didn't know how to start it. And so, so my point is that technology has to be done thoughtfully and always with the customer in mind.
Has the hype gotten out in front of the technology in terms of where you are? I mean, you speak to groups, I've spoken to groups, and people say, I don't want a car that doesn't have a steering wheel. And I finally say, it's not about you. Nobody says that you can't drive your F-150 up north next weekend or next year or in 5 years.
Right.
My sense is the industry is kind of settling back and trying to gauge expectations.
Well, I think you're right, Daniel. And we've been relatively quiet, and part of the reason is we didn't want to overpromise and underdeliver. And I kept cautioning our team over the years to look, this journey is unknown. How long it's going to take is unknown. The way the technology is going to develop is unknown. We know it's happening. We're heavily invested in it. We're very excited by it. But making these grand pronouncements and then rushing to get something on the road, if we do it wrong, if the industry does it wrong, it'll set it back for years. And so there has been a lot of hype, but the reality is it is coming. And you think about cities today. You know, I gave a TED Talk back in 2011, which, you know, in our industry was largely panned because I said, you know, if you think of the world having 7 billion people today and then going to 9 billion, at the same time, if you believe the futurists, all that growth is going to be in cities. I simply said, how are they going to move? How's that going to work? And so, you know, and I think that is true even today. And so we have to find a way in cities to make moving easier. And you're already seeing things like scooters, bikes, you know, e-bikes. All these things are trying to enable people to move more freely in cities. None of them are silver bullets, but you see that not only are manufacturers, but particularly city planners are really struggling with this.
Is it more important to be first or to do it right?
I think it depends. But if it's a binary choice, I'd say do it right because you know, speed is important. You can't be a laggard. You can't be one of the last in. But I do think it's really important. To me, it's most important that Ford is a trusted company. Nothing is more important to me than our corporate reputation. Nothing. And therefore, we have to be trusted when we introduce something. It has to be something that people understand and trust.
So what advantage does Ford have as a 110-year-old, 115-year-old
Right.
family company, essentially? What are its advantages as you go into this Auto 2.0, this next chapter?
Well, when we do the research, Ford is one of the more trusted companies in the world, and we have been named one of the most ethical companies in the world. And to me, that's really important because, but that can be lost overnight. It takes years to gain a reputation. You can lose it very quickly. So I think, you know, we drive this every day with our employees, this point home that whatever we do, we have to do with integrity, and we have to do it in a way that our customers are going to trust. Because if we turn out technology and customers are afraid of us or afraid of the technology, it's not going to work.
If you ran into somebody at a cocktail party and they said to you, Bill, why are you restructuring now when you're making so much money? Why is General Motors restructuring now? And I don't expect you to speak for them.
Right.
But you're, I think, looking at a new, both of you are looking at a new industry paradigm. But a lot of your constituencies are looking at a traditional one, saying, you don't do these kinds of things in these kind of economic times. What's the explanation to that person?
Well, first of all, having been through 08, 09, I think none of us want to relive that. And so, and we've had a nice economic run for a while, and it's inevitable that a recession is going to come. So we're trying to get our house in order so that we can get through any economic downturn and continue to invest in great products and new technology. And that's simply the case. In addition, you know, because that will be expensive, it'll take a lot of talent and it will take time. I think you're going to see lots of partnerships start to, you know, obviously we announced something with Volkswagen, but I would expect you to also see automakers and tech companies, startups. You know, this is going to be a long journey, and it's going to be, I'd say nobody can do it alone.
My read is that this year may be one of the most, probably the most tumultuous year in a decade since 2009 for the industry. You've got some more restructuring to do. General Motors is in the middle of it. Other companies are taking actions. Number one, do you think that's true? And secondly, how is that going to kind of complicate your ability to manage the business going forward? You got national contract talks coming up with the UAW later in the year.
I mean, look, every year is uncertain. So I think we could probably be sitting here at the beginning of every year saying, wow, this is going to be a pivotal year. Having said that, there is a lot of uncertainty going into this year. You've got trade situations, regulatory situations, none of which are clarified yet. The one thing that our industry really craves is clarity because of our lead times. And so we can deal with almost any reality as long as we have some clarity. And right now, there's very little clarity as we go into the year, so that does make it more challenging.
When President Trump first came into office, he spent a lot of time in Detroit. He was going to be the best friend of Detroit. Yet a lot of the policies, I think, create the uncertainty you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, so we, whether it's tariffs, whether it's trade, whether it's, it's regulatory policy, there really is no certainty right now. And unfortunately, the climate in Washington is such that, there's very little civility and there's very little getting accomplished. And so that makes it hard for businesses to operate, not just Ford, but any business, because we make decisions, and they are billion-dollar decisions plus on sourcing, on purchasing, all these things that are affected by all these issues. And we're doing it now kind of flying blind, and that's not the way we want to do it.
Do you have any sense as to where you think the tariff situation specifically is going to go, tariff on imported vehicles?
No, I don't have any clarity. I mean, we have indications. The one thing I do feel good about is, because Ford is trusted, we are listened to in Washington on both sides of the aisle. The problem is getting both sides of the aisle together.
Let's talk about the company a little bit more. What are you trying to achieve with this restructuring that Jim Hackett is undertaking with the team globally? They announced last week, I believe, some actions in Europe. They signaled some things are coming maybe in the second quarter here in North America. What are you trying to achieve?
Well, Hackett uses the term fitness, and I think that's probably a pretty good term. It gets back to what you and I were discussing just a minute ago about getting ourselves ready for any eventuality. And also, importantly though, we're doing it with our employees. We're asking our employees to help us make the company more fit and help us identify areas where the bureaucracy or the corporate way of doing things is just either outdated or getting in the way of doing a good job. And we want to eliminate that to the extent that we can.
A company like General Motors sold out of Europe. They just exited after 90 years. They had 2 brands there. They sold the brands to someone else. It's kind of hard to sell the Ford brand, isn't it, to someone else?
We don't want to sell the Ford brand.
Exactly. So like in India, you've partnered with Mahindra.
Right.
Is that where you have long-term problematic issues and market issues? Are you more likely to partner with somebody than you are to sell the business?
Oh, it'll be very opportunistic for us, around the world, and it'll be project by project, vehicle by vehicle, and so we won't have. It's hard to really characterize what we'll be looking for because, as I said a minute ago, we'll also be looking for tech partners in certain cases, young startups. We just bought a scooter company, and people could say, well, why in the world would you do that? Well, guess what? It's another form of mobility. We just closed Chariot, which was something we bought, tried, didn't work, and and that's the world we're going to be in. And even the scooter company that we bought, which I think it's an incredibly talented team, they'll probably iterate their product into something that looks quite different than what we see today.
In the old paradigm, people would say, you bought Chariot, you sold it after 2 years, what a failure.
Yeah, but
and how do you respond to that?
I think one of the things that we've recognized is that we're going to have to try a lot of things. And there is a term called failing fast, which is if it's not working, don't hang on to it, don't wish it were different, deal with reality and move on. And so, we hope not to fail. We'd love everything to work, but that's just not reality.
I have had a lot of emails and comments from people that say, what is Ford doing exiting the car business? What do you know that the average guy doesn't know or see?
Well, first of all, if I could go back in time, I'd love to reframe that whole discussion because all it is we're changing the silhouette. So if you think of today's sedan, that's still going to be there, but it's going to have a different what we call top hat on it. Why? Because there's more interior space, there's more usable space. People want that. And guess what? If they don't like it, we can go back. And so there's nothing magic about it, but we're listening to our customers. They're telling us that they like the higher profile, they like the more usable space, and it's something that they value. If we're wrong, or if tastes change, or something in the world changes that requires us to revisit it, we can easily do that.
You mentioned earlier the VW alliance. You had your first announcements this week. What do you think the end game, or what do you hope the end game is, or where are you headed?
Well, I don't know that there's an end game. I see people try to write end game scenarios, which is kind of crazy since we're just starting. You know, and really what we've announced has been in Europe largely, and then in some other markets around the world. You know, we want to walk before we run. We want to get to know each other. We want to make sure that our cultures work well together. We want to make sure our teams work well together. Because, hey, look, I've been doing this a long time, and we've had a lot of partnerships over the years. Some have worked well. A lot of them haven't worked well. And when they don't work well, it's really not a lot of fun. And the reason you go into them is you go in thinking you're going to save time, you're going to save money, and you're going to save manpower. But guess what? If they go bad, you actually use more of all three. And then you're looking to get out. And when you get out, it's usually a very difficult thing. So we're doing this with Volkswagen, you know, with our eyes wide open. You know, so far our teams are working really well together, very encouraged by that. And we'll just see where it goes.
You had, back in the late 80s and 90s, you had Auto Latina
Yes, we did.
with them in Brazil and Argentina. It was dissolved, from what I understand. It did not end very well. Why do you think this, what are the conditions that make this different? Because in my experience, you know, covering the Daimler Chrysler thing in Germany,
right,
a lot of this comes down to culture and
no
management.
question, no question. That's why I led with culture. Culture is the most important thing here. And, you know, Volkswagen has a new management team, came from the outside, very impressed by them and very impressed by the kind of culture that they're trying to set at Volkswagen. One of the things I'm most defensive of is the Ford culture. I love the Ford culture. A lot of things we need to change about it, but I love our company, and our employees love our company. And we have the most loyal employees you could ever find. And I never want that to change. And if anything gets in the way of that, I'm going to be in there swinging away. So I had to be convinced on this, not on the business equation, but on the culture equation, that we were actually going in with a partner that felt comfortable, that saw the world the way that we see it, and that we feel that we can work well with. And we'll see. I mean, as I say, it's very early days, but the early returns I'm very encouraged by.
Is some kind of autonomous collaboration really the pinnacle of where you want to get with these two?
Well, we're talking about it, and we're talking about electrification too, but it's really complicated. There are a lot of different tails because you kind of start there and then you work back to all the things that have to happen to get you there. And the devil, of course, is always in the details. So, and that's why, you know, I think some of the analysts thought we were going to have this giant announcement,
right,
all-encompassing. But that was never going to be realistic because we're doing this in ways that we're sort of in bite-sized pieces, but we are talking on these bigger issues as well.
Both companies have family control as part of their capital structure, a couple of really large shareholders. Do you see any scenario in which there would be a cross-shareholding between Volkswagen and Ford?
Look, I suppose you never say never, but I sure don't ever see a day where the Ford family gives up its voting control of Ford Motor Company. And that was never on the table as we started these discussions. I mean, I read some articles saying, oh, why didn't they do cross-shareholding? I didn't want it, and I don't know that they wanted it either, but it never came up.
How are you thinking about a little bit more about mobility, autonomy, electrification, all as one?
You know, they could be one, but they may not be one at the same time. What I mean by that is, you know, so we're launching our AVs, and we're looking at different propulsion systems like hybrids, where you get more uptime, because the key on autonomous vehicles is you want to maximize their running time in cities. You don't want them to have a lot of downtime. Now, clearly, in time, these will all come together. Well, I'd say clearly. I don't think anything's completely clear, but I think the supposition is that electrification, autonomy will come together. And so, but there will be steps along the way. And actually, a lot of the technology that's going to lead to autonomy are going into vehicles today. So a lot of the stuff that are helping drivers today, those are really early stages towards autonomy.
You know, a few years ago, I think the assumption was Silicon Valley had the advantage in this next generation of automotive. It could move fast, it was risk-taking, it was innovative. What I think they're realizing is that the auto industry is a highly regulated, highly engineering-driven, precision-driven manufacturing business.
Yeah, it's not like software where you can launch it and it be 70% correct and then fix it on the fly.
Exactly.
I mean, we're dealing with people's lives here.
Is that lesson being learned, do you think, over the last 5 years?
Yeah, I do. I think there's been a real recognition, not just in Silicon Valley, but I think among the people that cover the business, because I think the people that cover the business a few years ago would have said, OEMs in Detroit, they're going to disappear, and this world will belong to the tech companies. But first of all, it's hard to make things. It's hard to make things in great quantity, and it's hard to make things with great quantity and great quality. And I'm not sure there was an appreciation for that as people looked at the OEMs. Secondly, there's also a real skill in integrating technology into the vehicle. You can't just grab technology and toss it in a vehicle and say, hope it works. You've got the vehicle's electrical architecture that has to be compatible with all the new technology that's being developed. And so we've got that skill. And I don't know if you saw this, but we had more patents last year than Google and Facebook. And so this is a dynamic industry, and we have a lot of intellectual property at Ford and at GM and at Fiat Chrysler and around the world in a way that I think people are just starting to wake up to.
Why is it such a well-kept secret?
Because people aren't paying attention, and maybe we don't tell the story well enough. But it's sort of interesting. It's like all the things that we do in the community. People often say to me, how come we don't know about this? Well, part of it is maybe people aren't paying attention. Maybe it's not newsworthy. But it's true. But the shiny new thing, and everybody loves the shiny new thing, is not a 115-year-old car company. But the fact is, we're actually making ourselves into the shiny new thing, and some people are starting to pay attention.
You guys we talked about it backstage. You guys had a good week at the show with the Explorer, actually before the show, big Explorer launch, the Alliance announcement. Yet the stock continues to kind of go along. And why doesn't Wall Street, do they not pay attention? Do they not get the story? Are you not?
Well,
it's not moving along fast enough?
It's a hard story, right? Because we're in transition. And I think a transition story is hard to tell and it's hard to understand. And I think as we get through 2019, I think there'll be much greater clarity in terms of, I think people will say, oh yeah, now we get it. But the other thing is, we can't really tip our hand beforehand on a lot of the things that we're doing. And so, we're having to sort of say to people, well, take our word for it. Well, analysts have models they have to create, and taking your word for it doesn't fill out a model. And I think there's part of that. And so we're going to have to live with a bit of uncertainty as we get through this year. 18 was always going to be a transition year. 19 is a year where we start to see some results. And I think, as I say, we get through this year, people will start to really understand what this was all about.
18 was a big year for Ford in Detroit. Why'd you buy the Michigan Central Depot?
A lot of reasons. At one level, because I literally hated, as somebody who loves this area, I hated seeing that as the poster child for everything that was wrong with Detroit.
Right.
That's certainly one reason. But another reason that's more fundamental to our business is that we're in a war for talent. And as I was thinking about the train station, and frankly, all of Corktown, we have something there that can't be recreated in a Silicon Valley campus. We can take something that was once one of the most beautiful buildings, not just in Detroit, but in the world, and not only restore it to its former glory, but repurpose it to create the future. And to me, that is so cool and compelling. And as we're trying to get young people to come work for us and ask them to help create this future with us, what more interesting place to do that than in Corktown and in the train station and in the community that we're going to be operating, not just the train station, but the other buildings that we're putting together too, and to do it in a community that is the oldest community in Detroit. It's got great character, And we're spending a lot of time in that community to make sure that this is not seen as a corporate takeover of Corktown.
And your family comes from County Cork
It does.
originally. So this
It
is
does.
kind of like
Well,
coming home, and this is where your great-grandfather launched the company in Detroit.
Well, no question. I mean, you know, it's really interesting. A couple of years ago, my whole family went back to Cork to celebrate Ford Ireland's 100th anniversary. And our family is still on the same farm that Henry Ford's father left from in 1847. And they're still there. They're awesome people. And it's a great connection. And so those famine ships came over. Most of them went to Canada first. And then the ones that came to Michigan either settled in Corktown or in Dearborn. And so, you know, and obviously there's a real connection, a physical connection called Michigan Avenue between Corktown and Dearborn, which is very cool as well because, you know, in our vision, I think of a corridor that stretches from Corktown to Dearborn to Willow Run to Ann Arbor. And to me, that's going to be an amazing test bed for everything we're talking about.
We talked in June about this when you announced the whole thing. I'm curious how the vision has evolved as you've gotten into the building. You've probably spent some more time there, a little more comfortable.
Yeah,
give us a sense of how the Corktown vision is evolving and what you see now, which may be different in 3 months, 6 months, 12
Well, first of all, it's even more exciting. Now that we're in there, we're getting so much inbound from all around the world, not just, you know, from the Midwest or not just America, from all around the world saying, we want to be part of this. And so that was surprising, I think. Secondly, so actually, now that you mention it, this weekend we're doing something very cool down there.
I was going to ask you about
We're doing a Winterfest, starts tomorrow night at 5:30, where people can go down. Unfortunately, they can't go in because we're starting to winterize it and get all the water and the dampness out as a first step in the restoration. But we're going to project on the side of on the front of the building, some really cool films that will give people a glimpse into the future. We're going to have events and art and everything going on down in front of the, it's going to be really, really cool and fun, and we want the community to come see it. And we're going to be doing things like that. You know, we had Halloween down there. So we're trying to do things that will engage the community well before we open the doors and say, here it is. Because this really is a community project. One of the things is we're hearing a lot from the community about what they'd like there and what they don't want there. We're trying to be very sensitive to it because, again, we don't want this to be Ford coming down and sort of having sharp elbows and saying we're going to do it our way.
what are some of those things that they do want? And
They
don't
would like community space. They would like local businesses to be represented in our developments. And they'd like us to work with them on things like housing and other things that are important to that. So we're listening. We're very much in the listening mode, and we're trying to incorporate as many things as we can.
I don't want to put you in the ground here, but the legacy question comes to mind.
Yeah,
okay?
exactly.
You know, this is it's a pretty iconic undertaking under your chairmanship to do something like this. Have you thought about that?
Look, I am 61. I have been doing this for a long time, but I also wake up every day thinking about tomorrow, not yesterday. And I think we're at such a really cool and interesting time in Detroit and in the industry that I don't spend a lot of time thinking about my legacy, the past. To me, my legacy is just going to be what it is. There's nothing I can do about it. I mean, but what I want to do is to make the city a great city again. And I want to make Ford a great company for today and tomorrow. And if I can play a part in doing those things, I'll be so happy.
But I mean, I've long thought about the symbolism of this, you know, having a 21st century automotive technology in Detroit, using that as a hub for testing and all sorts of other things. I mean, that would be pretty remarkable. And
Well,
what it says about Detroit, not only what it says about Ford and the American auto industry, but what it says about Detroit.
Well, look, you know, Detroit has been through, you know, Daniel, you've lived here a long time. We've been through so many things. You know, I lived through the riots as a young boy, and I'll never forget yet. And I've got lots of stories, which someday I'll share with you because they're kind of interesting. But, you know, so I've seen Detroit at its best. I've seen it at its worst. And I'm so excited about where it's going. Ford has paralleled Detroit in many ways. We've had some great times, we've had some horrible times. We've had great success, we've had great failures. You know, my great-grandfather, in many ways, was the ultimate disruptor. He would have loved the time we're in right now. And, you know, I think he would have looked at us 10 years ago and would have said, really? You haven't moved on? And I think he'd look at us now and say, this is amazing, and I love this. So I look at Detroit, and I look at Ford, and in many ways, we're very similar. And so to take a 115-year-old company, to take a city, both of whom have had huge ups and downs, and to get together, create a future that's very different, I love that.
Your initial plan was that you're going to have about 5,000 jobs in that building, 2,500 from Ford, and the other were going to come from kind of this amorphous, where they're going to be suppliers or tech companies or whatever. Are you getting fielding a lot of calls and
Yes.
expressions of interest? Can you characterize, without, I'm sure you don't want to name names, but
No, we can. And it's everything from big developers to mom and pop shops. And, you know, we want to make sure that we really know what we want out of this, not just the train station, but all of Corktown, before we start finalizing the plan. The easy thing would be to start signing people up, and it would be very exciting. Well, we don't want to wake up and say, oh my goodness, well, why are we doing all this? Because our real needs are this. So we're spending a lot of time figuring out what our needs are and what the needs of the rest of the potential tenants would be. And then once we have the master plan all figured out, then we'll start signing them up. But I will say this, we really want to have unique experiences there. We don't want stuff that you can find easily elsewhere.
what do you mean?
Well, so we'd like restaurants, coffee shops that are local, maybe have local chefs, are local. It's not to say we won't have some national representation, but if we do, we want it to be unique. Because this is going to be a special place, and we don't want it to feel like someplace else you've ever been. And that's going to require, excuse me?
Authenticity.
Authenticity and fun. We want to make it really fun, and we want to make it a destination for Detroiters to come and hang out and meet people. And maybe they're going to go to a hockey game, but they'll come and meet their friends down at the train station first and then go down to the game. We want it to be a gathering spot.
Do you contemplate acquiring more property in Corktown or in Detroit?
Well, you never say never, but I think we've kind of done our bit for now. We've hit pause. We've got a lot to figure out. We don't just have the train station right next door. We've got that large book depository building.
Right.
We have the factory. We have the old brass factory. We have land. I mean, we've got a lot of things we have to master plan for. And I got to make sure that our appetite, our eyes aren't bigger than our stomach. So. We got a lot to do, and a lot to do in a pretty short period of time. It's going to be great, though, and I can't wait to open the doors and show it to everybody.
How many people have asked the question, how can you justify the expense of doing this when you've got all these other issues you're dealing with in the business?
But it's not either or. So if you look at, we had a lot of money set aside for a big redo of our Dearborn campus. So we're repurposing some of that money for downtown. And if you go back to what I said earlier, we're in a war for talent. Any company is only as good as the people that work there. That's it. It's not the factories, it's not the machinery, it's not the technology, it's the people. And if we can attract the best and the brightest and give them an amazing place to work and give them real world problems that they can solve, to me that's really important. And I believe that, when we finish with Corktown, we'll create the kind of space that young people from all over, from Michigan, but from all over, are going to want to work there.
What does that talent look like? And what I mean by that is, what's the skill set? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? What do they want? What are you trying to answer with something?
Well, you use the word authenticity, and I think people are searching for that. They want to believe that they work for a company with ethics and a culture that they can believe in. They want to work on problems that they think they can help solve, that they can make a difference in. They want to get involved in the community but not in the way that I got involved in the community with, necessarily with big organizations. They want to network, and they want to leave their mark at a young age on things. So we want to provide those opportunities for them. But the physical space itself is also important.
I think Nolan? I think Nolan's got a few questions for you.
Great. Oh.
It's a great discussion. I hate to see it end, but we did promise our audience an opportunity to ask some questions, and we have a few here. We're going to try to get through them. Staying with the Corktown theme, we have a question from the audience about whether this project, this investment, can survive a recession, a downturn in the automobile industry.
Well, that's our plan, and that's why we're trying to get our company into fighting shape, so that when the inevitable winds of economic downturn hit, we have no idea when or where that will be, that we're going to be ready for it, and we've got to continue on with it because we're going to have to attract talent regardless of what the economic conditions are.
A number of questions from people who asking about the perception that Ford and the domestic automakers are lagging the Asians in terms of technological innovation. Do you see that?
In some respects, China does have the lead, and in other respects, I think we do here. And so, it's interesting. The one area that I think China's really pushed to the front on is electrification. And, that certainly wasn't the case 3 or 4 years ago. I think autonomy, though, you're seeing a lot of that development here, although it's certainly being developed in Asia as well. So I think it really depends in terms of what type of technology we're talking about. And the nice thing is, because we're a global company, we can take innovation from anywhere in the world and apply it to our products. So, and that's our plan, is to be opportunistic about where it actually is developed.
How do you see Ford's line of pickup trucks and service vans, the big SUVs, evolving as we move to self-driving vehicles? What will happen to plumbers, electricians, other tradespeople who need those vehicles?
Well, first of all, they'll have electric options. So if they want an electric work truck, they can have it. And that does a couple things, actually. One is it'll give them a portable generator, if you will, in the workspace. And secondly, when you take the engine out of the front, you have more usable space for other things. Or if they want hybridized versions, they can have that as well. So, but you asked about autonomous workplaces. Well, in many cases, the vehicle can meet the worker at the job site, if that's the case. You're still going to need people to do the job. The vehicle's not going to do the job, but the vehicle can deliver parts. Think about this. You have a workman at a job site, and they might have brought out 6 of the wrong wrenches. That vehicle can quickly go back and pick up wrenches while he or she continues to work on other issues. You save time and you save money ultimately, and it becomes a really interesting proposition. So, but this notion that people aren't going to be needed to do the jobs anymore, that's not true.
Bill, how will Ford's mobility initiatives impact the supply value chain?
We don't know yet, actually. I think a lot of this is TBD. Now, interestingly, the supply chain is working really hard on all aspects of this, and a lot of the Tier 1 suppliers have some really, really interesting technology that could be very useful as we go forward. But there's no question that the whole supply chain is having to reinvent itself as all these new technologies are coming on board. And the other thing is there'll be non-traditional suppliers, and we're already seeing that coming into our space. So there will be lots of change as we go through it, but the really good companies will navigate that change and come out with even more opportunity.
Is there any chance that this Ford-VW partnership will keep alive some of our favorite Ford sedans?
Well, we really haven't, done anything yet in North America, and whether we do or not, I don't know. That's very much TBD. So it's way premature to even think about that.
How can public transit and Ford's new mobility solutions coexist and thrive? Do you see synergy?
Yeah, no, in fact, I'm a big believer in public transit, but think about this. Think about all the transportation assets in a city all being on one cloud platform. So now, why should the Uber or Lyft have to wait for the train if the train's running 15 minutes late? That train should be talking to all the other transportation assets so that you're not burning fuel and wasting time sitting there. So to me, we're going to have a really integrated transportation system where public transport, private transport, micro transport are all talking to each other to help move around cities much better than today.
And finally, Bill, we had a lot of questions about climate change. What is the auto industry's responsibility to address global warming, and what is Ford Motor doing specifically? How large a priority, how big a piece of the conversation is it at Ford?
Well, it's huge, and interestingly, we've committed to the Paris Accord, and I don't know, we may be the only auto company that has, and we've committed to hitting the Paris Accord glide path. That's very important to us. To do that, we're having to invest heavily in electrification because it's the only way we know to get there. My fear is not that we won't hit that. I just wonder if I think the whole industry has to think about, will the customers be there for all this electrification? We certainly hope so, and we believe it will, but it would help also to have some of the tax credits come back to enable the customers to make that leap. This isn't a new topic for me, as you know, Nolan. And for a lot of years, I was not very popular in our industry for taking a green position. But I always felt it was important because I felt like we had to get on the right side of it. Otherwise, we would not attract the best and the brightest of the next generation to come work for us. And I still believe that. We've made great progress, not just in the vehicles, but in the way we make the vehicles themselves. There's a lot more to do. Electrification will get us a long way there. But then, of course, as a society, we have to have a discussion about where are we getting the electricity, how is it generated, is it really clean from well to wheels? But that's a whole other discussion. But to answer your question, we've committed to Paris, and we're going to go after it.
Well, that's the final word. Bill Ford, Daniel Howes, thank you. Great discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. That was fun.